Every autumn, the small town of Harrow's Hill hosted a local festival that attracted visitors from far and wide. The festival was known for its grand corn maze, which drew crowds looking for a thrill. This year, the maze promised to be bigger and better than ever. However, the townsfolk elders whispered warnings about the maze, saying it was a trap, but no one took them seriously. Little did they know the maze was indeed a trap, but not just any trap. It was the work of a sinister cult. The festival was in full swing. The air was filled with the scent of caramel apples and popcorn, while the sound of laughter and music created a lively atmosphere. Among the festival goers were 5 friends: Jake, Emily, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. They were excited to tackle the famous corn maze, which had a reputation for being challenging. "I hear this maze is insane. We might actually get lost," Sarah said with a grin. Tom laughed. "That's the fun of it. Let's see who gets out first." The group paid their entry fees and received a small, hand-drawn map of the maze. They glanced at it briefly before folding it and stuffing it into a pocket. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, they entered the corn maze, the tall stalks towering over them, blocking out the world outside. As they ventured deeper into the maze, the laughter and sounds of the festival began to fade. The corn stalks seemed to close in around them, creating a maze that felt more like a prison with every step. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the corn. The group paused, looking at each other with wide eyes. "Probably just the wind," Tom said, though he didn't sound convinced. They continued walking, but the rustling followed them. The deeper they went, the louder it grew until it became clear it wasn't just the wind. The rustling turned into whispers, eerie and unintelligible, giving them goosebumps every now and then. They quickened their pace, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, but the whispers followed them. Out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the corn. It was a man dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes wild and unfocused. He lunged at Sarah, grabbing her arm with a vice-like grip. Before anyone could react, he pulled out a rusty knife and plunged it into Sarah's chest. Blood sprayed, and Sarah's eyes widened in shock before she collapsed to the ground. The man disappeared back into the corn, leaving Sarah's lifeless body behind. "We need to get out of here!" Jake shouted, his voice shaking. They turned and ran, panic driving them deeper into the maze. The map they had been given was useless now, and they were completely lost. As they stumbled through the maze, they began to notice symbols carved into the cornstalks. Strange, intricate designs that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Emily recognized them from her studies in ancient cultures. "These are sacrificial symbols," she whispered, her face pale. "This maze, it's a trap set by a cult, a death cult. They use mazes like this to capture and sacrifice people," Emily explained. It was then that they realized that they had walked right into a deadly trap. Sarah was the first victim. They had to get out, but the maze was designed to keep them in, leading them deeper into danger. The group moved cautiously, every rustle and whisper setting their nerves on edge. They came across a clearing with a large stone altar in the center, stained with dark, dried blood. Symbols were carved into the stone, and strange artifacts surrounded it. "This must be where they perform the sacrifices," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind Mike, wrapping a barbed wire around his neck and pulling tight. Mike struggled, his eyes bulging as he clawed at the wire cutting into his flesh. Blood poured down his neck, and within moments his body went limp. The attacker disappeared into the corn just as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Mike's lifeless body on the ground. With 2 of their friends dead, the remaining 3 were in a state of shock and terror. "We need to find the exit," Emily said, her voice trembling. "There has to be a way out." As they wandered through the maze, they found more evidence of the cult's presence. More symbols, discarded clothing, and bones. The maze was a graveyard for countless victims. They came across a section of the maze where the cornstalks were lower, and they could see the stars above. It gave them a brief moment of hope, but that hope was quickly shattered. Tom felt something grab his ankle. He looked down to see a hand emerging from the ground, pulling him down. Jake and Emily tried to help, but as they pulled on Tom, more hands emerged, grabbing at their legs and arms. Tom was dragged down into the earth, his screams fading as the ground swallowed him whole. Jake and Emily managed to break free, but the terror had taken its toll. They were exhausted both physically and mentally. The maze seemed to stretch on forever, and they had no idea how much longer they could survive. Jake and Emily stumbled upon an old wooden shack in the middle of the maze. It looked abandoned, but they decided to take shelter inside, hoping to catch their breath and come up with a plan. Inside, they found more symbols and a book detailing the cult's rituals. Emily read through it quickly, her hands shaking. They believe that by sacrificing people in the maze, they can summon dark forces to gain power, she said. We need to destroy the altar to break the ritual. They gathered what little strength they had left and made their way back to the clearing with the altar. They could hear the cultists chanting in the distance, and they knew they didn't have much time. As they approached the altar, they were ambushed by the cultists. Dressed in dark robes with a scary face and bright eyes, the cultists moved with a deadly grace. Jake managed to grab a heavy rock and smashed it against the altar, creating a huge crack in it. The cultists screamed in rage, and a dark energy erupted from the broken altar. Emily was grabbed by one of the cultists, who dragged her toward the remains of the altar. The cultist raised a knife, ready to plunge it into Emily's heart. Emily screamed as the knife came down, but at the last moment, Jake threw himself between her and the cultist. The knife pierced his chest, and he fell to the ground, blood pouring from the wound. The broken altar began to crumble, and the ground shook violently. The dark energy that had been released turned against them, consuming them one by one. Emily, covered in blood and barely able to move, crawled away from the chaos. She managed to escape the maze just as the sun began to rise, its light banishing the darkness. Emily was found by the townsfolk, her clothes torn and bloodied, her eyes haunted by the horrors she had witnessed. She was the only survivor, but the memories of the maze and the friends she had lost would stay with her forever. The corn maze was burned to the ground, but the whispers of the cult's dark deeds still lingers in the air. As the festival came to an end, the townsfolk could still hear the echoes of the screams that had once filled the maze. The horror of the sacrificial maze would forever haunt their dreams, a chilling reminder of the evil that lurked just beyond the cornstalks. And as the sun set each night, the shadows in the field seemed to grow more menacing, as if the spirits of the sacrificed were still searching for a way out, forever trapped in the sacrificial maze. Let's hope they are not successful someday. Until then, sleep while you can. Good night. Sweet nightmares.